Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. While our last few episodes have been about leadership, today we're taking a bit of a detour and talking about a position that is often overlooked and sometimes misunderstood, the Provincial Ombudsman. Today we're honored to be joined by Sharon Pratchler, the Saskatchewan Ombudsman. But before we get into that, we've got some big, juicy topics to sink our teeth into. And the last time Ian and I chatted on the show, a federal election was just called. The leader of the Catholic Church was a guy named Pope Francis, and Newfoundland and Labrador had a premier named Andrew Furey. Flash forward almost a month, and surprise, almost everything has changed. Ian, it seems like it's been a month and a bit. How has your last month been?
I hadn't realized all those things had changed. So I guess relatively stable, all things considered globally. I was saying to some people just this morning, the last 10 days, I've been in three provinces and one territory. So geographically, things have changed, but not so much as an earth-shattering change as we've seen in this country and beyond.
Well, one of the big things that has changed, and it is our first topic of today's episode, and that is a story a little bit close to home. The treatment of elected and appointed political leaders, staff, and sometimes even the public has eroded significantly in recent years, while the prominence of incivility and abuse has grown at the same time. What victims are experiencing is unique in every case, but there are themes that have emerged and continue to get more complex and polarized. Any elected official will most likely see themselves in a brand new book by my friend, my co host, Ian McCormack. Uncivil Society Countering Gaslighting, Stalking, and Other Forms of Abuse is now out on the bookshelves, which can be purchased by visiting the show notes below or going to Municipal World. Through interviews, stories, and research, Uncivil Society is designed to identify and highlight the problems of incivility and abuse, to speak to why it's getting worse, and to provide some hope for now how to counter this scourge. Ian, first off, congratulations on the book launch. How are you feeling about this book? And as it hits the bookshelves, and people, especially on my social media, are connecting to it in an honest way, how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, the gestation of a book is longer than the gestation of a human. So to say this was my baby, I'm not sure that that's completely accurate. However, coincidentally, I do in fact have several copies here of Uncivil Society, and I quite like the cover. So thanks to Municipal World for that. Several people have asked about this, I never really actually enjoyed writing this book, but I thought it was an important topic to broach, particularly within the context of the environment in which we and many of our viewers are watching here. During your introduction there, you also mentioned a little bit about hope. So I thought it was really quite necessary to say there is light at the end of the tunnel if we choose to take the actions that are necessary to get there. We being a collective, because there has to be a shared desire for that to happen. But to acknowledge at the same time that this is a problem. It's not just happening in Canada, it's getting worse, and we need to be able to do something about it. So that's really where the idea of uncivil society came from.
In the book, you lay out many examples. You spoke with many elected officials. You spoke with many people from across Canada, even around the globe as well. And I can imagine hearing these stories about the uncivil rest with that lies within our political decorum. It's kind of heartbreaking. What was the common thread that you heard from municipal leaders? I know each story is unique, but what was the common thread that you heard from the participants of this book?
Well, first of all, you're right. I talked to 20 something elected officials, administrators across Canada and beyond. There were definitely some themes. This is maybe like what we've seen happen over the last decade or so with being able to talk about things like mental health. That now we're able to talk about abuse, harassment, various types and forms, various levels of severity depending on the individual receiving it. So this gave rise to the ability to speak about something that had been a taboo topic in the past, which just was part of the job, suck it up, buttercup. But now we're realizing and recognizing that there is a shared frustration, if you like, which is kind of one of the feelings that I did get. And there's a little bit of shared, I mean, I've used the word hope already, but a shared hope and recognition that we can actually do something about it. Because, I mean, you made reference to social media comments already, and this scourge is preventing people from running for office. In fact, there was one person I interviewed for the book who had chosen not to run for office at all because she saw what was happening. And in other play, people we're seeing good people choose not to run again. We've seen people take leaves of absence during an elected term. We've seen administrators who have moved on from jobs. And there's one person I interviewed as an administrator who said, in her current role as a CAO, this is my last municipal job, that it either works here or I'm getting out of the field. So that, I mean, harkens back to the frustration. And I think we as a society end up worse off for it.
Most people, and I'm one of those people, would say, why you? Why did you take a passion in writing this book? And for those who are listening, Ian and I are going to be sitting down for an episode of Municipal Affairs in the future, and we're going to be diving into this into a more long format. But my final question in this show, in this topic, is why you? Why did you think it was important for you to write this book?
I'm not really sure, actually. That's a really good question, Chris. The flippant answer would be why not? But the real answer is I've seen this happening all over the place. I've seen it getting worse. A couple of years ago, Strategic Steps hosted a symposium called Bucking the Trend, which really had a bit of a look at this as a topic area. And ever since then, the idea has been rattling around in my brain. And I approached Municipal World with this idea maybe a year and a half ago, just to say, is this something that you'd be interested in publishing? And they said that they were. And that really got me digging into the material to try and be a little bit independent or take some of the emotion out of it, even though I recognize that this is a very emotional, non-independent topic for every person who's involved in it. So there's a huge thank you that goes out to everybody who shared their stories, some of whom I quote in the book, others of whom asked to remain anonymous, and I certainly respect that. So this is a collection of stories, and I've been writing now for quite a while. This is obviously my third book, so I wouldn't say I enjoyed writing the book, but I do think it was an important topic to broach, and I've had a lot of experience in this realm, so it seemed like a reasonable thing to try and contribute.
Going from uncivil society to uncivil council. Our second topic today comes from Castanet News in British Columbia. A Kamloops councillor says an upcoming report will lay bare details about city council's struggle to maintain order amid governance issues brought on by Mayor Reid Jackson. Earlier in May, City Council sent out a press release and a summary of a report originally compiled for Ravi Kahlon, BC's Minister of Municipal Affairs. It was posted on the city's website in May. Councillor Stephen Karpuk, this month's deputy mayor, says he's hopeful a redacted copy of the full report, which is 100 pages in length, will be released in the weeks ahead. Quote, up until this point, we've made statements and we've not been able to give any real, solid evidence, end quote, the deputy mayor said, adding, quote, we felt it was time to be able to sort of take the handcuffs off and just say, look, this is what was done. We've gone through the process, end quote. Council said it submitted the report to Kahlon on February 13th after the minister asked for an update on the work being done to implement recommendations from the municipal advisor Henry Braun. Braun was tapped last year to look into the root causes of council dysfunction, concluding the mayor's shoulders the blame over the combativeness and unwillingness to accept feedback or admit fault. The report for the minister included governance challenges and actions taken to address Braun's recommendations, according to the summary. It said Hammer Jackson's actions have resulted in more than $1 million in additional legal expenses for the cities halfway through the term. Now, the summary said independent investigations have sustained 24 workplace-related complaints against Hammer Jackson, including multiple WorkSafe BC claims. The city can't legally disclose in detail, though. The document said as of mid-February, the mayor has committed 21 confirmed breaches of privacy. Now, Hammer Jackson said he'd like to see the three things: the proof, the facts, the evidence backing city council statements. Quote, we've been hearing this now for 2 years. They call it councilors' communication strategy. They go behind closed doors, the mayor said. When asked to respond to statements saying he received 24 sustained workplace related complaints and nearly as many confirmed privacy breaches, Hammer Jackson asked how he could breach privacy if he doesn't attend those closed door meetings. Ian, Kamloops is a community that makes Chestermere look somewhat normal. When is enough enough? When does the province have to come in and do something about this ongoing disruption to democracy?
I'm going to disagree with it right off the start. I don't think they make Chestermere look normal. The situations were quite different. The Chestermere, to me, was a bigger story because there were more people involved. However, Chestermere has essentially, I think, been resolved, and they seem to be operating quite well at the moment. We've worked with them quite a lot over the last year. Kamloops, on the other hand, to me, it's a case of I'd be very frustrated too. That you talk about the mayor demanding evidence and facts, and like there was another term as well.
Proof.
Uh,
What is a proof? A proof is a
Proof, right?
proof, according to John Cretchen.
Thank you. The issue with it is we're a lot of it is like he said, she said stuff. So proof becomes quite difficult, and proof relies on documents, emails, those sort of things that are written. Whereas different people have different perceptions of those things. Like, I mean, I get really frustrated with this. In the province, the province getting involved, whether it's the province of BC with this case or any province getting involved with any municipality, one order of government using a hammer on another order of government is a tool that ought to be very sparingly used. And generally, they are. They try and resolve, the provinces try and resolve the issues amicably without bringing that hammer out, but sometimes it's necessary. And in this case, and in some others we've seen too, this is where the person who's the major problem and the biggest impediment to good governance is either willfully blind or pig-headed, my word, pig-headed enough to avoid accountability while at the same time claiming to be the one on the right side of the rules and ethics. And to me, that those two pieces just don't work together.
The mayor seems to have his back up against the wall here. We talk about the statement that he wants to see the facts, the proof, and the statements because he can't respond to them because he was never in these meetings. Allegedly, and I should say that off the bat, these are all alleged because I have
Right.
not seen the unredacted report. I'm going by what the news has reported and what the councillors and deputy mayor has said. So the alleged allegations. How can, and this is the general broad sense here, not just what's happening in Kamloops, how can municipalities like Kamloops function with this type of alleged dysfunction? Because $1 million is a lot of money to anyone, especially in today's age. When you're using the public dime to settle political scores, and I say that respectfully because that's what it's honestly coming down to from the outsider's perspective, is $1 million of taxpayers' funds, which could be going to roads, sewer programs, are now being used to figure out how to move forward. How can we stop this from happening? And I know you just wrote a book about this, but how do we move on so we don't get ourselves into another scenario like what's happening in Kamloops?
Yeah. This type of a situation happens quite commonly, but a lot of times it's in the smaller municipalities, so we don't hear about it. The larger the municipality, the more likely that municipality still has the capacity to deliver what people require. They can still, to use your terms, clean snow, fix potholes, pick up garbage, put on rec programs, social services, that sort of thing. And so the services are being delivered despite what's going on at the very top of the organization, which has a huge impact on culture, of course. And in cases like this, where the story's going on and keeps getting worse, and since the beginning of time, at the beginning of the term, and I don't think there's any amount of evidence or hard evidence that's going to convince the mayor to own up to this and get back on the road. So it's a distraction, I think, in a place like Kamloops. I think it does them poorly when they're thought about. I don't think it has a big impact on the actual delivery of services and programs and capital projects and that kind of thing. However, I hope that the people of Kamloops are watching. And I hope they're as completely disgusted as I am, and it sounds like you are, and others are, and is reported in the media as well. Because ultimately, their council is their board of directors between elections, and their mayor is their chief elected official or chair of the board. And maybe the people have had enough of this at some point and will choose to do something about it. And there are circumstances like that across the country over the years that have happened too. I will say, if I may, too, as a corollary to this, this is one of the reasons that the inclusion of strong mayor powers across the country, particularly in Ontario at the moment, is quite bothersome to me. That in a lot of cases, it's not going to make a lot of difference. But in a case like this, if this mayor had strong mayor powers, I think it could make a lot of difference into what actually happens in the city of Kamloops. So I hope the people are watching. I expect the people are still getting the services that they want, but it's got to be battering the culture, the political culture, and the administrative culture of the city for sure.
Well, it's going to be a story that you and I are probably going to continue to watch as it
Probably,
unfolds heading into the second half of their term.
probably.
And I want to turn to our final story, and it's a little bit closer to home. And the topic of the story is not the story itself. It's about what is going on, particularly around libraries. For the first time, supporters of the Valleyview Library have heard directly from town mayor and council about the contentious move to eventually close the existing facility and relocate it to a yet to be built K to 12 school. The library's funding and future have become a source of tension in the community located about 350 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. The town hall meeting was called after weeks of criticism of the town's council and a few heated library board meetings, including one last month in March, I should say, that culminated in the RCMP being called during the public engagement portion. One of the board members resigned days after that board meeting. Now, it followed an investigation by CBC's The Fifth Estate that found the town's decision to close and move the library were conducted behind closed doors, with Valleyview residents unable to have their voices heard. Now, at a March meeting, supporters of the library were given the first opportunity to question officials about several recent decisions. The council had previously voted to cut the library funding by $60,000 in December and about half the town's allocation. Residents also questioned how the town was appointing library board members. Ian, given the community backlash and the importance of library as a public space for marginalized groups, how should, and again, we're not picking on Valley because this is a bigger, broader story about libraries in general, how should a council commit to holding a transparent and inclusive public consultation process before proceeding to issues around closures and moving of facilities like libraries, rec centers, any facility that a municipality is responsible for?
I think libraries in particular are a bit of a touchstone at the moment. I am completely biased about this as well as a public library board chair and a longtime library trustee in earlier years. So in Alberta, and it's a little different across the country, libraries are covered by the Libraries Act rather than here by the Municipal Government Act. So they are standalone in terms of legislative authority. They have their own independent board. However, the appointments are made to that board via, in this case, via the town. So the town can appoint people to the library at once that it sees most appropriate or most fit, sometimes based on the recommendation of the board if they're involved in interviews. In this case, I think the town council has mishandled this uh, quite significantly. And I think a communications expert would probably give them some quite different advice. And that is, we have a small-ish group of people who are trying to make a social statement, talking about freedoms without acknowledging responsibilities, talking about censorship, under the name of freedom, which to me just is an antithesis of recognizing that this is a collective community living room, and that freedom for me doesn't mean freedom to take away your freedoms. Censorship has become more and more prevalent. So I think in this case, that's why I think libraries are a particular topic here rather than you mentioned rec centers. And sometimes there's comments about rec centers, but less so about social issues than we see in libraries. In this case, the town went a particular direction. The library board was, in some people's words, stacked in a way that was not reflective of the town, and the town had had enough. So when council had their public meeting, they may have called it a town hall, I can't remember. They put some pretty strict rules on this, like no asking questions in public, I think was part of this, which is only going to get people's backs up. And so 100 or more people in a town of not very many hundreds of people showed up, and literally and figuratively. This also then means that we're in Alberta now, we're 4 or 5 months away from an election, that this sort of topic is one that is going to make it quite raw throughout the election campaign. So may also be something that pops up as a ballot box issue in the small town of Valleyview, where I've actually worked a few times over the last 15 years.
Well, we'll be watching this story as it continues to unfold, and as we head into the municipal elections here in Alberta in October. But
Great.
I want to now head over to our interview with the Saskatchewan Ombudsman, Sharon Pratchler, for our quick roundtable discussion. I will note, just before we jump into that, it is a longer than normal interview. The full interview will be airing the following week, as it traditionally does. But we just want to remind you that this is a shortened version of that interview, and it is a little bit longer than our traditional 15 minutes. So be prepared because you will learn a lot. So stick with us. Today, we have a very special guest with us. Sharon Pratchler holds a Bachelor of Commerce in LLB from the University of Saskatchewan. She received her designation as Counsel Learned in Law in 2005. She's a member of the Law Society of Saskatchewan since 1993. She's a member of the Canadian Bar Association, serving as chair from 2015 to 2016, preceded by successive terms on the executive, including treasurer. Ms. Pratchler has had many professional highlights through her career. And after starting out in the private practice, she spent most of her career as a lawyer in public service. She has served in the positions of Senior Crown Counsel, Constitutional Law Branch, a secondment to the Minister of Central Services, the Litigation Unit, Civil Law Division, Registrar Court of King's Bench and Provincial Court, an Executive Officer Court Services, Second Amendment Civil Law Branch, Minister of Justice, Solicitor and Crown Prosecutor, Moose Jaw and Regina Prosecutions Unit, and Director of Economic Crime, Regina Prosecution Unit. She has also served in several community leadership roles throughout her career. But that's not why she's here today. In 2022, she was appointed as the Provincial Ombudsman for the province of Saskatchewan, a role that she continues to serve today with honor and distinction. So with that introduction and that honor of us having you here, Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I'm almost blushing at this point. It's like, I hope I do credit to that introduction.
Sure you will.
You certainly will. I want to ask a very general, open question, if you don't mind. From a municipal standpoint, as we are a municipal show, how does the Saskatchewan Ombudsman work with municipalities?
Yeah, well, one word that I use a lot is collaboratively. My personal philosophy is that our role contains, and our statute actually tells us it does contain, an education component. And I really feel strongly that for people to learn, they have to be comfortable and safe. And the way to do that is you have to come alongside them and and help them on their journey wherever they may be.
Sure. So we often have viewers or listeners from beyond Saskatchewan. Can you talk a little bit about beyond education, what it is that the Ombudsman's role does in intersection with local government in Saskatchewan?
Yeah. So the bottom line is really that we provide a measure of oversight in terms of ensuring accountability to the intention of the Legislative Assembly as expressed in the municipal legislation. And so if somebody is unhappy with something that happened and feels that a municipality didn't treat them fairly, and we tend to think of it in three different areas in terms of the outcome of a decision, in terms of the process that was used to arrive at a decision, or in terms of a relationship, how the person was made to feel during that process. We can engage on one of those fairness issues. And what we try to do in Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan's really known for this, is to try to do early resolution. So the best outcomes happen early for members of the public and for municipalities, because they have a lot of other things they're tending to as well. And so we try to resolve it, and we always try to either continuously improve a service that's offered by a local government, or we try to coach a ratepayer or a member of the public who may not always be a ratepayer, who has to engage with that local authority, that municipality, and figure out a way that they can kind of peacefully move down the road together. They don't all have to be the best of friends, but they have to find a way to work together that works so that the member of the public feels like they were heard and the municipality feels like they were understood.
You talk quite a bit about education already, and have you found a circumstance or a line between when municipalities, councils can handle matters on their own versus when your office might get involved?
Well, just recently, and actually it was already percolating in my mind that we needed to do something that was not just early resolution, because that's when a complaint has already come in, but before that,
Hmm.
because we often get calls from municipalities where they want help. They're like, this is brewing and we think that it could go south, and can you help us? And so previously, I think the response from around our office was, well, just a sort of discomfort that if we got involved at that stage and it later became an investigation, we didn't want to be seen as having prejudged or,
Right.
participated in any way that might suggest we were supporting one or another, because our office isn't for or against anybody. We're like a mediator, we're impartial, we're a peacemaker,
Hmm.
is a description that I like of our office. But I had thought about that and I heard the question at SARM and I thought, no, the municipalities are asking for this and this is a service we can provide. And so we've just recently started offering the service, and we've tried it already in one municipality, and we have a couple more municipalities lined up and want us to come out quickly. And so we think that if we intervene in that way, we can actually help the municipalities negotiate the rocks and stay away from them. And even if they do end up on with a complaint, we're hopeful that there's a good understanding of process and procedural fairness on all sides,
Hmm.
because municipalities are because they're statutory creatures and because the people who work for them, the administrators, the elected officials, um, always think in terms of the statute, but imposed on top of that statute and the bylaws that are enacted under the statute are the rules of procedural fairness that come from case law. And so sometimes that's even challenging, for lawyers who've been doing it for a long time. So how do you blend those things together? Because the rules of procedural fairness aren't written in stone. They depend on the circumstances and the particular decision that's being made. So I really see a role in us explaining what those rules are and how they play out in particular situations. And so, for example, in our annual report this year for last year, I highlighted a case involving a code of ethics investigation and started to talk about procedural fairness and notice and what those rules of procedural fairness are about. And I plan to do a one pager and do some education sessions as well. But I really kind of think, I don't know that they're a SWAT team, but I have a team of my municipally trained with a manager who has a really good background in de-escalating situations, because she's worked in both mental health field and the field of addictions. I was a manager of a detox center. So she has just this beautiful skills in helping everybody de-escalate and resolve conflict. So I'm pulling together different people in my office and saying, what if we just go out to a municipality and say, what do you need from us? Is that we're just going to deliver it right here. You're not going to have to wait a month or however long. We're just going to get out there and do it. Now, in doing that, I always worry that I don't want to create expectations that we can't deliver on because of capacity. So we're always managing our capacity. But that's a new tool that we're adding.
And
I
Chris,
just
what
want to I just want to jump in here for a second because you've mentioned the word procedural fairness a few times in the interview already. Now, we live in a world where both Ian and I would assume that your role is to be fair on all situations, but we live in a partisan world as well in today's world. How do you ensure, and for those municipal leaders who are listening to this, saying, are you fair? how do you ensure that procedural fairness at the end of the day? Because you are a nonpartisan appointee from the Legislative Assembly. I learned that this morning in our pre-interview call, so I'm just putting that on the record. So I need to make sure that I sound smart. But how do you ensure that procedural fairness in today's age? Is it trying to just block off all the partisan noise that's out, or is there something that your office does to ensure that fairness is perceived to be fair?
Yeah. So there's a whole range of things we do. And one of we talk a lot about emotional intelligence. And so self awareness is really important. So, for example, we will talk amongst ourselves and peer support, sort of if I'm looking at a situation, my starting point is curiosity, not judgment. So I might hear something at an early stage of a file that, some people might say, oh, ooh, whatever. But you can't do that. You have to say, I haven't yet heard from the other side. So it's that self awareness, the language we use in the office, the critical mindset we have, the way we will, check each other and say, okay, but, I haven't made a decision yet. We can't prejudge this. So we role model those values in the way we do the work. So, if you start at the top of the rules of procedural fairness and say you need an unbiased decision maker, like what would you want if a decision is being made? Somebody said some allegations against you, and how would you want to be dealt with in that situation? Well, first, you want an unbiased decision maker. So I stay off most social media, other than I have a little bit of fun on LinkedIn talking about leadership and gardening and things like that. But even then, you have to be careful because you don't want to say something that somebody may say, well, you've made up your mind on this issue. So I've had to give up. And, people will ask me to be on this committee or that committee. And I'm like, no, I can only be on the committee of the Legislative Assembly. That's the only role I can play in this role, so that I'm not perceived as having any particular bias.
And if you're seeing what we're seeing, that's an increasing issue with local government across the country and beyond. What have you seen in terms of either the number or complexity or weaponization of legislation in terms of conflicts or alleged conflicts of interest?
Yes, it's actually one of the areas that commonly comes up in the calls to our office. I find that people are very alive to the issue, but then it's sometimes hard in certain situations to apply it. And so, one of the things that lawyers often say about conflicts is that the person in a conflict is the least likely to recognize it, but it is their personal responsibility. And so, sometimes it's really helpful if somebody points it out to them and then a discussion ensues. So sometimes we're getting calls where people are debating whether it is or isn't a conflict and calling us, which is interesting because I can't tell them whether it is or not in advance. All I can say is, here's a guideline that we've provided. Make sure you go through the legislation. Here's what Municipal Advisory Services has provided. And in the end, it's a personal decision you have to make. But some of the things that I like to remind people of is because sometimes people will think of a conflict, it's only if you get a benefit or something happens, to your advantage. But it can be a negative as well. You prevent something from happening. And people have a hard time with that part of the conflict piece. But I just try to make it real for them in terms of how will the person affected by your decision feel if this particular issue is known, and even if it isn't known but becomes known later. And also a risk analysis. If you do not declare conflict when you should have, you have a decision that is voidable. And it also has implications for you. So, in terms of disqualification is the most significant one. So really do that risk analysis and think, even if in the end of the day you conclude it's not a conflict, do you really need to be involved if somebody else feels that way? Have that discussion, because perceptions can be as problematic as the reality of a conflict. But you live in that community, especially a small community. What is the best way to get along after that decision is made? So there's also a practical, even if the rules as set out in the legislation don't apply in your scenario, think through the practical implications as well. I think that's really important for people to consider.
Listening to you talk, you've talked some governance, you've talked some legal. Your role seems to be part of both. Do you lean on one side or the other more heavily?
No, I try not to be a lawyer at this stage in my career. I mean, I am a lawyer and I've been a
Yeah.
lawyer for 30 years. But what I've learned in the 30 years is don't talk like a lawyer. Talk simply, one page, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I always reference, if you were sitting at the kitchen table explaining something to somebody, your parents, your grandparents, how would you explain it? So talk that way, right? And because that's the way people need to have information presented because it's accessible to them then. So people are sometimes surprised that I am a lawyer, which, it's kind of funny. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good. Because then I'm accessible, right? I'm not talking in a language that you can't connect to, because that's what we're always trying to do. What is a way I can present this to you that it's accessible for you?
You said a number, and both Ian and I saw Ian's reaction. I saw my reaction as well because we're watching this as we're
Oh,
recording. And you said 4,000 complaints.
yeah.
Now, for an outsider, 4,000 seems like a very large number. Is that normal in Saskatchewan? Is that typical in the province, or is this seeing an increase over year after year? And what do you, and I'm it's kind of saying you as the royal you, as the ombudsman, as the office of the ombudsman, what do you chalk that up to? Because I can imagine, because you are, and I say again, you as the royal you are a small office, 4,000 complaints is probably a lot of person power to try and accomplish 4,000 for a province your size.
Yep, it's actually 4,064 in 2024, which was an 11% increase. And interestingly, it was almost completely across the board, not just any particular area,
Okay.
although because of one systemic investigation we're doing, it was higher in that area. So, and then you also have to break it down between files that are in our jurisdiction and those that aren't. So there were 3,225 files, 29 files that actually fell within our statute. And then the others were ones where people are, talking about federal government, private, or something like that doesn't involve a public entity under a jurisdiction. So the role we play in each of those are different. So if it's not in our jurisdiction, we don't just say, hey, that's not in our jurisdiction because this is a taxpayer, right? And they're lost in a system that's very confusing. So we say, okay, how can we help you? How can we be a pathfinder? Like, what is your main issue? And then we try to connect them with either a federal ombudsperson or some appeal process or whatever other resource they might need. So we have to distinguish between what is it this person needs. So part of our role is kind of to fish that out, right? So if there's an appeal mechanism that they haven't used yet on the provincial side, if it's within our jurisdiction, we refer them to that. With municipalities, we really coach people. So when they come to us, they may have, this is the problem with my municipality. And we're like, okay, but let's just talk about that. Like, so here's the procedure that they're required to follow, and so um, that seems to be that they're following it. So we're not sort of saying, oh, we're an advocate. We're absolutely not an advocate. We're trying to educate and have each side of any dispute see the other person's side so that they can actually then get along and figure it out. So sometimes we educate somebody and they say, okay, I get it. Sometimes they say, I want to think about whether I want to make a complaint. So when I came, all of those things were referred to as complaints. I refer to them now more as inquiries or requests for service. And it's like a funneling system. What is it actually? Because some of the entities would say, well, how come it says there were 3 complaints? Because your office didn't even call us. How can that be a complaint? And it's a request of some kind and an inquiry. And we may have responded to it without having to reach out to the entity. So I thought, well, fair. To be fair, I think we should call those requests for assistance. And then, a complaint, when does something become a complaint? It's not always really clear because somebody might call in with more than one thing. Because
Yeah.
for the municipal ones, although there's around 500 and some municipalities was 589, it was actually like 700 and some issues.
Mhm.
And so it's like separating those all. Well, maybe one of those issues is you just need some information. But generally on the municipal ones, we'll say, have you gone to council? Have you talked to council? First, have you done a delegation? Have you engaged with them? Because we want to see them doing that, because sometimes it's just lack of information or lack of communication.
I have one last question before I start my wrap up here, and it's kind of an important question because I live in the world where you measure success, you measure your failures, you measure how you're doing in the position you're in, but also you measure internally how your organization is dealing with the issues that are at hand. For you as the actual ombudsman, how do you measure the impact of your outreach and your success in your position as ombudsman when it relates to municipalities? Is it more people know you? Is it more municipalities don't call you? How do you measure your success?
I measure it by going to Sarma and Zoom, and how many people talk to me and what they talk about. I measure it about who's inviting me after that to other things. Like I'm going to the Rural Municipal Administrators Association next week and speaking to them and presenting to them on how to make fair decisions in the middle of conflict. I measure it by calls that I have with people in from Urban Municipal Administrators Association. I measure it in the conversations we have with ratepayers. So there's no really, and that's the one challenge in this job. There's no really easy metric. So my main metric in terms of how my office is performing is how quickly we do things and resolve issues. But I'm always thinking, how can I find a metric across this very broad subject matter to measure it? Municipalities is kind of easier because if you go out and mix with municipal folks, you'll know because they'll tell you, right? And it's who's going to come talk to you and who's engaging with you, who's inviting you to come out to things. But again, it took 3 times going for us to get to this level of, I think, comfort, where people are actually coming. And in one instance at SARM this year, I had a Reeve, the administrator, and at least three counselors wanting to talk about an issue that they were dealing with. And they just gathered around me and we just sat down and talked it out. And I'm starting to think, well, maybe we need a more kind of private area and those functions where we make appointments. And I think, no, I kind of like this better because then it just happens in a more organic, natural way, so
My final question for you, Sharon, before I let you go, and it's an important one because it's very open-ended, but I need you to keep it concise for me, if you don't mind. What do you want people to know about the role of ombudsman that we have not asked you about, that you hope people take away from this conversation? Because people from Saskatchewan might be tuning into this going, what's an ombudsman? How are they working to better my life as the person in Gull Lake or in the RM of Edenwold or the Saskatoon, Regina, North Battleford? How does your office help, and what would you want your last words to be to those Saskatchewan residents who might be listening to this right now that we haven't talked about?
I think I would want them to know that we're a place that can help them find their way in government, whether it's local or provincial. So we're a pathfinder. I think I would want them to know that we're also a peacemaker. So if they need some tools to resolve a conflict that they're dealing with, that's something we can help with. And we're not going to say, well, that's not our jurisdiction, so go away. We're going to try to actually help you, whether or not you're in our jurisdiction. But what we're really going to try to do is take the temperature down, and I think anything we can do to push that out into the world is a good thing. I would also say that we shine a light on things. So sometimes things need attention in particular structures, and we will shine the light on it. And the phrase that I always use from Myrna McCallum, who does our trauma informed training, is, I see you, I hear you, what you say matters. And so if you come and talk to us, we actually answer phones and we do in-person visits still, which is unusual in these days. And we will hear what you say. We can't always help you, but we'll tell you if we can't. But we will hear what you say, and that's a really powerful thing for people, especially nowadays where people aren't always listening, right? So we actually take the time to hear what you're saying, and sometimes that's what the person needs more than anything. But we will do what we can, but we will also be realistic about what we can do. And I guess there's a book called The Leader is Healer. And we always try to see if there's a way to help somebody heal in whatever situation they're dealing with, however simple that might be. So, whether that's a self care tool of some kind, like sensory strips that we have, a fidget pen, um, to know that you're not alone in the world. Although you might not fit into the box, you're not alone. Our office can accommodate you in some way in terms of engaging. That was a long answer, so I should stop.
For those who are listening and watching, the links to the Ombudsman's website will be in the show notes of the website on our website, crossborderinterviews.ca. I highly recommend that you check it out if you are a resident of Saskatchewan. The Ombudsman does amazing work, great work, and they are a essential tool in our democratic world that we live in. And I'm so honored, and I speak from Ian and myself, for Sharon to sit down with us, to spend an hour out of her day to chat with us about the role of ombudsman in the province of Saskatchewan. So from myself and Ian, Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Our
pleasure.
full interview with Sharon Pratchler, the ombudsman for the province of Saskatchewan, will be released next week. We'll be right back after this quick break. Ian, this is the very first time that I've sat down and chatted with an ombudsman, whether it be from Saskatchewan or any other province. Sharon seems like a wealth of knowledge, and she is very engaging and meticulous in what she says. How did you feel like today's episode and interview with Go?
I often say this at the end of our interviews that I really enjoyed it. One of the things that I'd asked her about was the difference between the legal perspective and the good governance perspective. And I thought that some of the insights that she had there were really good ones. And I've often said that work with local government is based on human relationships. And I think she echoed a lot of that as well. So yeah, she was a great conversation. And for those of you watching the short interview, I'd really encourage you to watch the full length one as well.
Certainly. Now, we have a busy next few weeks ahead of us. I'm going to be back out on the road literally as of about 24 hours after recording this episode. I'm heading off to Prince Rupert, British Columbia, for the North Central Local Governance Association in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Then I'm off to Federation of Canadian Municipalities in Ottawa, Ontario, for their annual convention. So I'm going to be back out on the road. We're going to try and do one more episode before I hit back out onto the open road from my travels to Ottawa. But what's on the agenda besides your amazing book launch, what is on the agenda for strategic steps in Ian McCormick for the next few weeks?
It's a good question about both of those because our Atlantic office has really been hopping and there's a lot of things going on there. As for me, next week, as we're recording, or this week, I guess, as it's being displayed, I'll be in Calgary working with the Catholic School Board, which is an annual event for us and something I really enjoy. And then just as you're off to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, we're a major sponsor for the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators meeting in Quebec. So we'll be there similar times in similar places. So that's where we're off to in the next few weeks anyway.
Look at that. Cross-border networks and strategic steps, the cross-country show.
Exactly.
Ian, always a pleasure to sit down with you in the political trenches. Look forward to sitting down with you in a few weeks' time to talk about the next big stories and talk to the next great guest that we have on the show. So till then.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to you later.